Thank you, Rob, and welcome everyone on this beautiful spring day. It's really sunny outside, and I hope you're able to experience some of the pleasure of that sun. Special greetings to everybody, especially if you're joining us for the first time. We're inviting everyone to our open table, and we share our knowledge and opinions with respect for our differences and act together to end homelessness in Pierce County. We acknowledge that we meet on the traditional lands of the Salish peoples, especially the Puyallup tribe of Indians, who have stewarded this land for thousands of years and still do so today. We also acknowledge the traumatic history of conquest, genocide, and stolen lands, and seek to be principled allies in honoring Indigenous voices. This week, I learned about the surprising super bloom event in the desert near Bakersfield, California, that followed the intense flooding of the past winter. Wildflower seed lying on the desert floor for sometimes decades erupted in a magnificent display of yellow, purple, red, and white blossoms. This made me think of spring, certainly, but it reminded me of other connections. Oh, I'm losing my spot here for a minute. Go back. It reminded me of other connections to the importance of second chances for people who've been incarcerated and to the need we all have to be nourished with the waters of respect and access to resources if we're to develop the gifts that lie dormant waiting for support. This month of April has been designated nationally as Second Chance Month, a time to encourage all to see and support the potential in people who, as social justice advocate Brian Stevenson would say, are always more than the worst thing they've ever done. This is a time, and not just in April, to be that water on the seeds of potential, water that includes resources like access to housing and jobs, which a criminal record can make really difficult to secure. I'm nearly finished reading the Tacoma Reads book selection, A Place Called Home by David Ambrose, and I'm deeply moved by his chronicle of the soul-crushing effects of deep poverty, homelessness, and mental illness, where a compassion drought, a conspiracy of silence about abuse, and a lack of attention by adults leaves children vulnerable and struggling to thrive. That super bloom in the desert of Bakersfield is not quite the picture painted in Ambrose's memoir, but the seeds of intellectual curiosity, ability, and hunger for justice are there, and oh, so clearly the commitment to not giving up. I encourage you to read the book. I think as well about the seeds of potential in people currently living houseless here in Pierce County and those whose housing is insecure. How might we acknowledge and encourage this potential with respectful listening and investments of all kinds, the social water needed for a human superbloom in our community? To center us today, I return to Thoughts of Spring with the words of Poet Laureate Ada Limon titled Instructions on Not Giving Up. More than the fuchsia funnels breaking out of the crabapple tree, more than the neighbor's almost obscene display of cherry limbs shoving their cotton candy covered blossoms to the slate sky of spring rains, it's the greening of the trees that really gets to me. When all the shock of white and taffy, the world's baubles and trinkets, leaves a pavement strewn with the confetti of aftermath, the leaves come. Patient, plodding, a green skin growing over whatever winter did to us, a return to the strange idea of continuous living, despite the mess of us, the hurt, the empty, a new slick leaf unfurling like a fist. Fine then, says the tree, I'll take it. A new slick leaf unfurling like a fist to an open palm. I'll take it all. The dystopian in me has a fatalistic view of this seasonal transformation as the warming of the globe promises increasing heat domes that kill trees even if well watered, where insect pests migrate north to destroy more trees, and where human migrants move in masses to any remaining temperate zones, presaging an end of the world as we know it. But then I remember the words of the early Protestant reformer Martin Luther, who supposedly responded when asked what he would do if he knew the world would end tomorrow, by saying, I would plant a tree. How utterly non-rational this is, and yet what better metaphor for the work we do as allies of those living unhoused. We can water the seeds of potential and we can plant a tree. Together with our fists unfurling to an open palm, we can take it all. Welcome to the work. So good morning, everybody, and thanks for listening to my thoughts about things going on in the sunny day we have. Just a few things about our meetings for anyone who's new. Everyone else knows this drill, but We have norms for how we participate on Zoom, and so we ask you to use the raise hand function if you can have access to that. If you're on a phone and can't do it, just do whatever you need to make yourself acknowledged. But if we do use that raised hand thing, Rob can keep track of the order of people's requests to speak. Also mute ourselves when we're not speaking so we don't distract others. And in addition, stop our video if we're doing things that might be distracting. To remind you, we use the chat as a real way to communicate during the meeting. And if you're new, this is a good place to ask questions that you're not sure if it have been answered before, or the information that you might need that might not be something that we have time for on the agenda, but someone will respond. And if you want to leave information about yourself or an organization that you're with, that's a good thing to do in the chat as well. And also let us know about resources or events that are coming up. So that's not disrespectful to use that time and carry on as you wish on the chat. And also we ask that we be aware of time and agenda so that if we've spoken once, to be sure we let others take a chance to speak before we ask to speak again. But we do encourage everyone to participate. And so at this time, if there are people who are new or returning from time away and would like to reintroduce yourself, this is a time to do that briefly. And if you are from a group and are wanting to talk about it, put your information in the chat or send a message to Teresa Power-Drudas, who will put her information there for anyone to contact, because we love to hear. We have spotlight sessions every week that we love to hear from people who have resources to offer or collaborations they want to discuss. So with that, if anyone's new, let us know you're here, your name and any association you have with the group that you might be working with.
We're all shy this morning.
Well, it's hard. You know, we have 52 folks here. And if you're new, you have no idea. You've come into this Zoom space and all these little boxes staring at you. So if it's not the easiest thing to do, I totally understand that. We just want to be sure you have a chance to say hello so that we can make connections with you when that's possible. So if you prefer, just put your information in the chat, say what you're up to and what you're interested in, and we'll be sure someone will be reading it and get in touch in some way or other. So I'll give it back to you, Rob.
All right, thank you. And trying to deal with an tech issue here, just a moment. All right, so let's move on. The first item on our agenda today is a reminder, and this would be a great opportunity. Jan, do you have a voice? Are you able to give a reminder about our social coming up?
Oh, yes. The first Thursday of every month, which is next Thursday, May 4. We'll meet at Scamp's Brewery on South Tacoma Way between 4 and 7. Bring a shareable if you want. We're encouraged to bring our own food, and it's just it's relaxed, good beer or water or whatever, and hope to see you there. No business. It's just a social.
In fact, you'll be in trouble if you talk business too much, because Jan will. All right. And just so folks are aware, apparently we had a user who was sending folks private messages. I know I got one at the beginning of the meeting that included a link. Please don't click on any links if you don't recognize the user. And that's what the tech issue I was trying to deal with. I'm not seeing that person on our attendee list right now for the meeting. So let me know in a direct message if you get an odd message from someone, and I can help try to take care of it. So let's shift over to our regular This Week on the Streets section. This is an opportunity for folks who do outreach to those who are currently unhoused across the county, to let us know what changes you're seeing in terms of what's happening on the ground, and talk about the impacts of sweeps that are taking place, and shifts in people from one area to another. So let's get started. This is open to anyone. Just raise your hand and I will call on you, and we'll start with Jay.
Just a warning, we're getting up to 79 today. That is kissing the hot weather inclement weather limit. So it should be going down soon. We shouldn't see 80. We might, though. It's very unpredictable at this point in time. Please gear up on water, tarps, handheld fans, cooling towels, things like that if applicable. But we won't hit a threshold to use any inclement weather or any supplies like that until 80 degrees. I'll send out a request for planning email later today on the inclement weather thread. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jay. And that's a great reminder for folks who do want to help out when we do get to the 85 degrees and higher range that triggers inclement weather response. Please do visit pchomeless.org, click on the link for link listservs, and sign up for the inclement weather list. I know folks have already been asking for, I hear folks have already been asking about water. So far too soon, we'll be dealing with that as well. Let's see, Bob, your hand's up next. How are things on the peninsula?
Good morning, thank you. Sorry, my video camera's not working again today. Some good things happening. Unfortunately, we were seeing a lot more county code enforcement warnings and evictions taking place, primarily on the KP. And that put us into a total reaction mode when someone didn't understand the eviction notice. Pierce County Sheriff and Code Enforcement shows up and shuts the property down, boards up the house. We've been able to have a good relationship, or a building relationship, with Pierce County Sheriff's Office, who is now volunteered to start communicating proactively with Code Enforcement and keeping us aware of people who are getting notices. We can reach out to them before crisis hits and try to help them bring the property up to spec, and or prepare them if they have no other options, at least to help them try to find services and housing before they're evicted. So that, really appreciate Pierce County Sheriff's volunteer to help us there. Another quick one is Peninsula School District, in conjunction with Communities and Schools, has identified at least 212 students homeless in our area, and that combines homeless living in vehicles, tents, and so forth, and kids that are couch surfing. We believe if 212 is what they can track, the real number is probably over 300. A lot of those kids don't have access to food, to hygiene items. Their couch surfing time with certain families ends quickly because they're not able to contribute much to that environment. And Communities and Schools, food backpacks for kids and fish, are now donating items to the school pantries. And this is providing the kids with food and products that they can actually take back to the homes where they're staying. So it's Band-Aids, but it's great community action. And we're going to grow these programs immediately. So that's it.
You had a question in the chat for you, Bob, from Jay, asking about whether the evictions that are happening are because of the lack of building inspections during COVID, or just more families in need than before.
It's a combination. Good morning, Jay. Yes, because of COVID, no money to keep properties up. People are defaulting and being evicted, but this is more focused on properties that have for several years been derelict. Families will move away from them, and one son or daughter, aunt or uncle will stay. Unfortunately, on the KP, you then become a target and sometimes prey for the significant number of drug dealers and people that have nowhere else to go. They move onto your property, they intimidate you, and the property just continues to get worse. In code enforcement, it's got a lot of patience, but a lot of the neighbors and as the property values rise, people are complaining more now. So it's a combination. We're finding that many, Jay, as you know, many of the people on the KP in these situations aren't just having financial troubles. Many of them have been justice impacted. They have mental health issues, and they do not understand or feel comfortable in trying to address the issues. So we're hoping to be proactive and help them do those things as well. So.
Thank you, Bob. And you'll see in the chat a mention from Valerie about some potential resources for households that are doubled up and at risk, both on the peninsula and the rest of the Pierce County. So thank you for that update. And next we'll go to Tammy. What do you have to say, Tammy?
Well, just an update on our camp. We had a death this week on Monday. We found one of our veterans deceased in his tent, which has been really hard on all of us. My case manager found him. I went in and checked to see if there was any sign of life. There was not. So of course we made the proper phone calls. But our veterans, when the medical examiner brought him out of the tent, our veterans put a flag, had a flag put over him, and did a veterans farewell. So they lined up and were called to attention to, as the medical examiner rolled him from his tent and around the camp and into the coroner's vehicle. They called to attention and gave him a veterans farewell. And I would like to give a shout out to Verna and Jeffrey. I made the calls to them because, of course, it affected all our veterans, and they were immediate response. So thank you. Our staff and our villages are all dealing with the death and grieving in their own ways. So, but out of that tragedy, I have 2 veterans who have bed dates for rehab starting Monday. So, you know, sometimes when there's tragedy, it happens for a reason. And now we have a few people getting clean because of it. But again, we're dealing with it at the village. Still a lot of grieving, still a lot of talking, still a lot of tears. But I just wanted to update everybody on how that was handled.
If I could just add real quick, I don't want to rush by the fact that everyone here has been so supportive of Fob Hope. And Tammy calls and people just drop everything and come to help us. And that is what this community is about. And I just appreciate everyone for helping us so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Tammy, I think you have everyone there has our condolences. That makes for a very rough week. It's good that you're able to see some potential silver lining, but still that's a very rough situation. So sorry to hear that happened. Anyone else who wants to offer an update of what you've been seeing on the streets this week? Richard, do you want to verbalize anything that you put in the chat? And then I see you, Jeffrey.
No, I'm good. I'll just use chat. Thank you.
All right, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Just want to bring this to everyone's attention. There are, during daylight hours, I'm seeing solo campers heading west and north. It's a little distressing because normally my experience is most of the campers are moving at night where they're not being interfered with. But if they're moving during the day, there's a lot of pressures on them somewhere, and I'm not sure where that is. I would suggest that when you're out there doing outreach, find out what's going on, because I haven't heard yet, and neither of any of the rest of us. But we're seeing a lot of solo campers, a lot of them. Not just, we're not seeing camps anymore. We're just seeing solo people going out there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jeffrey. And that's, looping back to the potential once that we know is coming for warm weather, that's going to be a mitigating factor in our trying to do outreach with water and other supplies when we get to the hot time in the summer. So it's going to be, we will talk on the inclement weather list about strategies to help us be able to locate where people are and get them the supplies and help they need during this hot weather that's coming up later this year. It's just going to be more challenging when people are not congregated in larger spaces. We do have the space on Center Street that has become a lot of the source of a lot of chatter and a lot of unfortunate negative things I've been seeing on social media. But there are fewer and fewer of the large sites for us to be able to reach out to multiple people. So keep that in mind as you're driving around your neighborhoods. It's going to be critical that we help pull together locations of where folks are so that we can get them the outreach that needs to take place. And of course, our professional outreach teams are doing that as well. So, all right, Bob, your hand's up. Is that from earlier?
Yes, sorry, I'll get it down.
No problem. Anyone else who wants to offer a last update from what's happening on the streets this week? All right, so let us move on to our main presentation of the day. I'd like to invite Ted Richardson from the city of Tacoma. Hi, Ted, welcome. You want to go ahead and get started with your topic, and do you need me to make you a co-host to share slides?
I do need to share slides, so if that means I need to be a co-host, then yes.
Yeah, let me do that for you.
Okay, so I can start. So hi, everybody. My name is Ted Richardson. I work in the City of Tacoma Office of Strategy, and my main responsibility is managing the Affordable Housing Action Strategy. This is our big document that was created in 2018 and implemented in 2019. And we are currently working on a new strategy or an update to the Affordable Housing Action Strategy that we're calling our anti-displacement strategy. It's going to take a very similar structure. It's a series of actions the city could implement to address the displacement risk that a lot of people in Tacoma are experiencing. And so what I'd like to do is walk through what we're thinking at a fairly high level for the anti-displacement strategy, and then get your feedback on it. I have a couple of questions at the end, but if you have questions or answers that aren't specifically what I'm asking for, I of course welcome that feedback as well. So let me get started.
Ted, before you get started, one thing that might be helpful for kind of just defining. So how do you define anti-displacement? This is in terms of the creation of new housing and gentrification, or is this related to what we would refer to as sweeps?
More housing focused, yeah.
Okay, perfect.
And there are a few types of displacement that I'll get into. And so you'll see different actions in here that are related to those specific types of displacement. But yes,
Perfect.
it's someone losing their housing. So 1 moment. Okay, is everyone seeing my screen? Okay, wonderful. Okay, so here's what the basic agenda. So what is the anti-displacement strategy? So I think the major point I want to make here is that very similar to our affordable housing action strategy, it's a set of actions that the city could deploy over the next several years. They're pretty broad in how they would address displacement, just because we know that displacement can occur for a whole bunch of different reasons. So what this is not is, upon adoption of this strategy, everything in it will happen at once. And so that's how the affordable housing action strategy has worked as well. It's really been a foundation for us to implement a number of different policies, but not all at once, but rather in succession. Just because we are constrained by staff time or resources. And while I would absolutely love to be able to do everything in here starting this summer, that's just not realistic. And we know that, but we're using this document is to serve as that sort of second foundation to our affordable housing action strategy, but with a specific focus on displacement. So then I'll go into the types of displacement, the geographic and racial data that we have, ADS, anti-displacement strategy. We love acronyms in the government, so ADS. So the actions, I'll get into those. And then finally, I have a few questions at the end for you all. Okay, but first, so these are our what we call guiding principles. These are really what we think should guide the combination of the different actions that we employ to address displacement. So I'll just go through these real quickly. We want to increase home ownership opportunities, just because we know that homeowners are less cost burdened than renters, and they're less at the whims of the housing market. We want to focus on specific neighborhoods that are higher risk of displacement. So we know that certain neighborhoods are much more likely to experience displacement than other neighborhoods. We recognize that we're still not able to support residents who are at our lowest incomes enough. And so we need policies that focus more on those really low income levels. We also want to spread affordable housing across all of Tacoma. It is still fairly concentrated in certain parts of Tacoma. And we recognize that concentration like that, I mean, one, it's just 21st century segregation in a way. We also know that there are benefits to having mixed income levels and access to amenities. The fifth is that we recognize that there are not enough larger units. You'll usually hear these called family size units, but we don't want to be as prescriptive. So because not everyone living in a larger unit is going to be a family necessarily. So we're calling them larger units. We want more larger units. Integrated income levels, so similar to spreading affordable housing across neighborhoods. Integrated is really, can we have affordable units inside of market rate buildings? And then finally, supporting individuals to attain and remain in housing. So whether this is like financial classes related to home ownership or increased support for permanent supportive housing, we recognize that certain members of our community might need that extra assistance. Or honestly, when buying a home, I think most people need assistance in understanding that process. So we recognize that those sort of educational components, for lack of a better word, are also sometimes necessary. So the types of displacement, and yes, these are all being displaced from the current housing unit in which you live. So there are three really overarching types, and then there are very specific types that fall into each of these. So physical displacement is when the housing unit itself changes so much that it's no longer possible to live there. So like a renovation or demolition is the like most simple version of that. Economic displacement is where the cost of continuing to live there changes so much that the resident has to leave. It's like rent increases are the most frequent type you see of that. And then there's cultural displacement, which is a little bit less intuitive, but it's when the community around you changes so much that you no longer feel at home. And so you might choose to leave, but you would still call that displacement. The important thing to recognize here is that the policy responses to the first two are very specific to housing. And so the anti-displacement strategy focuses on those two. You're not going to see any actions in here that relate to cultural displacement, just because the responses are more about supporting small businesses, supporting nonprofits, supporting cultural institutions, funding cultural events around Tacoma, or expanding our language access program. So just to try to keep the scope of this strategy somewhat reasonable, we chose not to include that, and we wanted to be specifically focused on housing. That doesn't mean the city's not doing any of that stuff. You're just not going to see it today or in this strategy. Okay, so geographic data. We use these three different sources. The one on the left is out of the University of Berkeley. The middle one is the Puget Sound Regional Council, and then the one on the right is the Tacoma Equity Index. The left and middle are showing census tracts that are at higher risk of displacement. And so on the left, you see those red blocks are high risk, the yellow is medium risk, and the white is low risk. The Puget Sound Regional Council, that like dark mustard color, is high risk, and then the yellow is medium risk, green is low risk. And then on the right, the Tacoma Equity Index, you have to flip your color scheme. So those darker colors are what we call higher opportunity, and the lighter colors in white are lower opportunity. So essentially what this says is there are a few parts of Tacoma that are at much higher risk for people being displaced. And so if we were to deploy any sort of geographic strategy where we'd increase programming and funding and marketing, it should be in these areas. And so having this data allows us to do better targeting in that manner. And then I don't know if anyone will be surprised by this, but certain members of our communities that are Black and Brown community members experience higher risk of displacement. And we have a lot of data that shows that from our homeownership disparity study and then the Spark report back in 2018. And then in some ways, it's just kind of intuitive with 400 years of racist policy and 100 years of racist housing policy. We haven't solved the effects of any of that. So I think that if we are to, you'll see a few actions in here that could be specifically targeted to Black and Brown members of our community. And we could also target some of our marketing to different racial groups in our community. Okay, so let me finally get into what's actually in the strategy. So that's sort of a long preamble. So it's broken up into 4 what we call objectives. These are the same objectives if you read our Affordable Housing Action Strategy. The difference is that some of these are programs that we already are using that could be expanded. Some are under development, and then some are new options. The difference is that in the original Affordable Housing Action Strategy, they were all new. The ones that could be expanded are affordability incentives. So that's really what could we give a housing developer and then require that they add affordable units to it. So often you'll hear about zoning changes so they could add an extra floor, but also can we do things around our permitting or tax incentives that would then mandate if they were to receive that benefit that they would have to add affordable housing. The next is expanding inclusionary zoning. So that's very similar to affordability incentives, but more specifically to zoning. So can they increase the size of the building? Can they increase the height of the building? Could they build more units in that building? And in exchange, they'd have to give us some affordable units. If you're interested in this policy, we're actively talking about this right now through the Home in Tacoma process. And so there absolutely is discussion that in some parts of Tacoma that get upzoned because of Home in Tacoma, that this would be an included policy. And so there's a lot of questions around that about what affordability levels we would mandate, or they could also be voluntary, what parts of Tacoma or all of Tacoma. So if you're interested in that type of policy, now would be a good time to advocate with council for expanded inclusionary zoning. The third here is financial support for a second housing unit, so like ADUs or DADUs. Is there a way that we could provide financial support either for a low-income homeowner to add that second unit to generate a source of rental income so that they're not displaced from their home, or financial support for a higher income earner who then would build a unit but would be required to rent it out in the rate. And then the last here is short-term rental regulations. You'll see a number of like very touristy cities around the country implementing this. So basically like to cut down on the number of Airbnbs. We're not convinced this is an issue in Tacoma right now, but it could become because we're seeing it grow in other parts of the country. And so we want to include it in the strategy, but it's likely one that you wouldn't see us active on immediately, just because Tacoma is a little bit different than like Colorado ski towns, for example, where they're driving out all of the workers in those towns. And then under development right now is our down payment assistance program. This is scheduled to be rolled out in the fall. And currently the goal is to serve 20 families per year with $50,000 in down payment assistance. And that will be specifically marketed towards our Black and Brown community members, because we recognize that they've had a lot more difficult time in accessing homeownership, and that homeowners are much less likely to be displaced. And then finally, a new option would be land banking. Essentially, can the city assist in purchasing land and then dedicating it to affordable housing? Okay, moving on. Rob, if I'm taking too long, you're welcome to hurry me up. So the second objective is keeping housing affordable and in good repair. So really that means preservation. So what we already do is a single family home repair program. This is generally for low-income homeowners that might not be able to afford necessary repairs to their house. So we've helped fund those repairs. And then new options are supporting a community land trust. This is from our original affordable housing action strategy. The only difference is the city really doesn't want to be the lead on this. We would love for it to come from the community, hence community land trust, and then for us to financially support it. The next is a preservation ordinance, so a way for us to assist in the purchase of older multifamily buildings and then require that they be used for affordable housing. So there's a few components here. Developers or landlords of certain types of buildings, maybe they're near transit or maybe they're in high displacement neighborhoods, would have to give us advance notice of the sale. We would then, we could layer on a right of first refusal policy where us or certain designated entities like the housing authority or the tribe, for example, would have the first right to purchase that building before it goes on the open market. They would still have to purchase it at market rate though. We can't mandate that it be sold under market rate. And then this would be most effective if we actually put aside money for this, because buildings are really expensive. So if we can help in the purchase, that would be more effective. Proactive rental inspections. These would be inspections to investigate the health and safety concerns of older units, just because often if it deteriorates so much, someone might be displaced for that reason. And then finally, this is sort of a controversial one that I'm seeing in my outreach, is financial support for landlords. We recognize that if a landlord were to renovate their property, they might raise the price of it, and then you lose that like quote unquote naturally occurring affordable housing. So is there a way that we could financially support a landlord to bring it up to a safer condition, but then keep it affordable? Or we've also heard the idea that we could financially support landlords who take on like quote unquote high risk tenants, which I didn't get a definition for what a high risk tenant is, but that was another idea. third objective is helping people stay in their homes and in their communities. So these are all things that we already do, but could be expanded. And most of them are temporary financial support for someone who's experiencing a housing crisis. So rental assistance, housing assistance is generally grants to nonprofits, and it could be anything from furniture to life skill building to it's really just anything that's not helping to pay for the rent, but that someone might need to stay housed. Utility assistance, tenant relocation. This is through our landlord tenant program. Currently a tenant who has to leave because of a few set reasons, they can receive $2,000 total to help move. We are finding that moving can be a lot more expensive than $2,000 though. Mortgage and foreclosure assistance, someone can receive up to $6,000. And then our rental housing code, which I think Chiquetta has come and presented on this before, but we're actively looking at expanding that right now. And then our last objective is reducing barriers for those who often experience them. Just we recognize that some community members are going to experience more barriers than others. So these are both new policy options. So the first is community prioritization. If you do any of your own research, usually these are called community preference policies, but it'd be a legal way for, if new housing were to go into a neighborhood, people who are already in that neighborhood or people who'd previously been displaced from that neighborhood could get first access to that new housing. And so in like a really basic form, it'd be a way for keeping Hilltop residents in Hilltop, or keeping East Side residents in the East Side of Tacoma. You'll see it a lot of different ways across the city or across the country. So like Seattle designates certain census tracts that are at high risk and then allows any housing developers building in those census tracts to use this policy. And then the city of Seattle helps them to implement, because it is kind of complicated. Whereas like Portland, for example, it's only around previous, they call them urban renewal projects, but I think renewal is an interesting word since it displaced a whole lot of Black members of Portland. So like 30 or 40 years later, the city of Portland recognized what they'd done and then put in this policy, but only for people who could prove that they'd been displaced because of those projects. So it can be kind of complicated. There are a lot of versions, but we are actively looking at this as a way to prioritize people who are already in Tacoma, essentially. And then housing and land reparations. This is gaining traction across the country. If you look up Evanston, Illinois, they did pass this a few years ago and are actively helping Black Evanston residents who experienced housing discrimination with reparations. And it's more in the form of housing than land, and housing or land. So the recommendation here would not be to implement this immediately. It would be to form a committee to investigate this, which sounds very bureaucratic. I recognize that, but there are a whole bunch of questions that we'd have to answer around eligibility or funding source, or the years that were years eligible that someone might have experienced that discrimination that would then qualify for these housing or land reparations. So there's just tons of unanswered questions that we would need a committee of community members in some form to answer. So that's everything I've got. The three things I'm specifically looking for are really what type of displacement are you seeing? Like, is it economic? Is it physical? Is it rent increases? Is it health and safety issues? Who are you seeing being displaced because of these issues? And then of all these actions or policies that I spoke to, are there any that stand out to you as like good ideas, or are there any that stand out to you as bad ideas?
Great, thanks, Ted. And first of all, there was a request if you could drop your slides into the chat or just email them to me so I can do that, whichever's easier for you. And yeah, we'll just open the floor to questions. I'll interject and just say, it seems like if our community is going to be walking the talk, we would actually make objective 4 objective 1, because it feels a little bit like an afterthought. Let's go ahead and start with Teresa.
So thank you for the presentation. Very interesting. And I imagine there are other people like me in this room who have like an hour of stuff we'd like to talk with you about, and we can't all do that. So I do recommend that you find a way to offer us a space where we can have a, those who are deeply interested in this can have a further conversation with you, because you're not going to get so much feedback here. I do want to say, of all the things that I would love to talk with you about, the land trust one is the one that is the most logical thing that this city has never done. And whether or not you want someone else to lead it or not, it needs to be led. And one of the things you might consider doing is tying those first things to the land trust. For instance, if you're going to help somebody with homeownership, help them with having a home within a land trust, so that we still have a public investment that we can rely on in the years ahead. I was here in my 20s and the city did this thing of encouraging home ownership. Those houses are now market rate. That hasn't helped us in terms of building out public housing, and that's the thing that you really need to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa.
Patricia? And you're muted right now, Patricia.
Hi, I think that there's a couple of things I'm just going to talk about, like the immediate crisis. What I have found with others is the rent increases happening that are basically pushing people into homelessness. The second is being able to be creative in what could be some housing models. Like it can be smaller units and people will accept that if it has everything it needs. And I'm just going to leave it at that. I can go a lot farther. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. And Ryan.
Hi, Ted. Kind of same old song, but is there anything in the plan to maybe enhance shared housing? Ways to get density up without relying on new construction. Just another comment is that our rents increase is a supply problem, and unless we increase the supply, we're just putting Band-Aid on a gunshot, and it's might buy us some time, but it's not going to actually move the needle in terms of solving the problem.
Yeah, I think one place we might be able to increase supply without building more per se, I guess you'd have to renovate units more, but not build new units, is through Home in Tacoma. We're looking at something called form-based zoning, which is essentially like the whole size or shape of the building, rather than designating the total number of units. This is becoming a more popular form of zoning across the country. And so that would be one path to do that. We're also hearing like increased interest from council in the sort of like apartment style buildings where it's maybe a shared kitchen, shared bathroom, those sort of things, but individual like bedrooms that you'd rent out. So I think in the immediate, probably through Home in Tacoma would be the best like advocacy path for that more creative type of housing. So I've certainly heard a lot of interest from staff and council about that.
Thank you, Ted. And Mark, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I don't have my video working today, but yeah, very interesting presentation. These aren't going to be life changers, but kind of on a smaller scale. Does the city of Tacoma work with Rebuilding Together and Habitat for Humanity? Can they play a larger impact? And then the other question pertains to, I know that there's a great organization in Seattle called Facing Homelessness. They have their block project where small homes are built in backyards, larger backyards of individual residences, and it really helps to shatter stigmas surrounding people experiencing homelessness. I was wondering if there's anything similar to that in Tacoma.
It's called Facing Homelessness.
Right.
I'm not aware of anything like that in Tacoma. But
I'll put it in the
very
chat,
intrigued.
and it's called, they do a bunch of stuff, but one of them is called the Block Project. Like I said, I'll put it in the chat, or I can send it to you separately.
Yeah, I'll put my email in afterwards, but I wrote it down. In regards to working with Habitat and Rebuilding Together, yes, absolutely. We fund both of those organizations.
Great.
Habitat is also a great partner for doing homeownership counseling, just because we recognize that purchasing a home can be quite difficult. And then with that single family home repair program, a lot of the money is actually goes to Rebuilding Together South Sound to do smaller projects.
Okay.
And then we do the like $100,000 projects.
Excellent. I just put it in. Yeah. Call the Block Project. Sure.
Thanks, Mark. Courtney.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this presentation. A couple thoughts that come to mind. I'd like to know more about this land banking thought, but before I even saw that, I was thinking about a public bank, which makes financing less likely home owners into home ownership. And whether or not that's something can be done at the city/county level, or if they need to use their bully pulpit to get it passed at the state level, a public bank is essential. And then I'd also like to talk more about social housing developer. Like the only real way to secure affordable housing is to take the profit motive out of it. I love community land trust, but social housing is also an important dynamic. And in that, you could have, the maintenance team that was talked about in one of the slides of, maintaining homes that already exist, especially for low-income homeowners. And these should all be city jobs with union benefits. So this is we have to build an entire system that works together with itself. And I think that if you're considering compensating landlords for building low income or making repairs that would raise the rents outside of their tenant's ability, I think those units need to be bought into the social housing structure. Instead of continuing to pay profits to business, you need to just buy their business and incorporate into the social housing stock. And then I also advocate for vacancy taxes, whether it be business, land, or housing. A vacancy tax can help mitigate some of the costs. Thank you.
I second that on vacancy taxes, and it's just not something that the city has talked at all about right now. In terms of land banking, we did actually get I think $1.5 million from the state legislature capital budget this year to do our first land purchase. But that's like only in the last couple of days, so we're excited for that. And then there's an interesting bill that didn't pass, sadly, out of Sound Communities. They're the ones advocating for it, called housing benefit districts. And the purpose was to trial a few, larger non-Seattle cities to land bank around future transit development. And it would be a way to strategically purchase land. It'd be funded through the state, and the cities it'd be recommended to the cities that they do a mix of incomes on those the land that they buy, just so that it become more of a revolving loan fund that they could use in the long term for affordable housing and to create those mixed income neighborhoods. It didn't pass. I think Sound Communities got $500,000 to continue their work on developing this idea, because it is quite complicated. But if you look up housing benefit districts, I really hope that there's potential there next year and the next couple of years at the state level.
Thanks, Ted. And Monique.
Good morning, Ted. Two things. Back in the day, I had a Habitat for Humanity home, and I did not have to qualify for a loan. They changed that. So is that going to be an issue for some of the low-income folks with Habitat?
Yeah, they do have a certain, honestly, I'm not real up on how their loan qualification works, but I know that with home ownership, we are targeting like 70 to 80% AMI, just because, like, you know, someone who's like extremely low income is not going to be able to afford the home. So then it's a question of what can we do to help someone become ready for home ownership. And so that's part of the home ownership counseling that Habitat does that we fund, and it's a HUD certified program.
Yeah, I love that program, by the way. Second thing, I don't know if you guys are aware, and this is for anybody on this call, the Department of Veterans Affairs has a VEND program. When they have homes that veterans couldn't pay for, they sell them at very low prices. Currently, there's one in Puyallup. It's a fixer-upper, but it's very low priced. And investors, anyone can buy these homes. They can either, the one thing used to be that you had to use it 3 years, the first 3 years for veterans. I don't know if that's still the case, but that might be something to look into. They don't always have houses close, but when they do, they're at a very good price.
What's it called? VEND?
Yes, VENDEE.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Monique. And let's see, Jeffrey.
Hello, Ted. I haven't heard anything about the city's offers to help those who are retired on fixed incomes, who are flat out being priced out of apartments, homes, and living in cars, tents, storefronts. What is the city going to do for the retired folks that are on fixed incomes? Where's the help for them?
I think that at least within this strategy, that would fall under the housing assistance or rental assistance, which I suppose if you're living in your car at that point, it's a whole different program that we'd have to employ. One question where this has come up a lot is if the city can do property tax relief, and that has to happen through the county or the state. So we specifically took that out of this strategy just because it's something that we don't really have control over. And again, this wouldn't be for people living in their cars, but through the home repair program, that is very frequently people who are older on fixed incomes.
Guess I should unmute myself. Dr. Jarvie.
Hi, I have the same topic as Jeffrey, but it's a little bit different because I want to tell you about a lovely old elderly lady who died yesterday. She was in our shelter, and she had cancer, and she went to the hospital, and then they told her she wouldn't leave the hospital. And she went out, her pastor helped her get a hotel room or something to take care of her. But that it just highlights the need for not just elderly homeowners, as Jeffrey was talking about, but we have a lot of homeless older people who need assistance. And sometimes when we talk about, like people of color, young families and stuff, we tend to forget that there are a significant amount of elderly people who are homeless on the streets or surfing through various family members. And I believe that the city needs to do something specifically to help elderly homeless people.
Yeah, thank you for raising that up, Dr. Jarvie, and sorry for your loss. As I said in the chat, there's so many losses in our community right now. Jay, why don't you wrap us up?
You cannot neglect, ignore, and not provide for your 30% and lower AMI any longer. This is ridiculous. All your plans are for 80% AMI or people that can. The people that can't are your essential workers and the people that have breaking their ass for their entire lives. To flat out hear how all of your plans are for 80% AMI and above, or all of these other, how about your low income housing that is now falling apart and disintegrating? How about your RDAs that have been allowed to fall apart because of neglect and mismanagement and nobody taking care of those programs? Where are our auditors? Where are people checking our existing infrastructure? You want to build for 80% AMI and for everyone else, but you are flat out ignoring your people that need you the most. You guys cannot, in Tacoma, continue to degrade your 30% and lower and expect us to sit here and deal with it and put us out on the street and then put up a 10 block ban to not see us through your own actions. The amount of criminality in the suicide rate and homicides that are created by the lack of support in our culture and community for everyone below 30% AMI, and most of them are Black and brown and indigenous and otherwise, are causing people to commit suicide and to harm each other. The pure neglect of what I'm hearing of people that are below 30%. Oh, well, we don't have any answers for any of them. We give up on them. They don't belong. If they can't fit this class where if you can take a class, then you have value. What is wrong with you people? When does this stop? Housing should be a right for everyone. Looking at me and saying, you need a class because you're below 30% when I have disabilities and can't get on disability because I'm functioning enough. And looking at me and going, you need to do more and more and more. What about you? What about Tacoma? What about Pierce? What about our community? Where are the people that are supposed to stand up for us? Oh, well, I don't have answers for that 30% AMI group. No one has answers. Y'all just want us to disappear and we're not going to. How about when do you provide and create space for people that can be a benefit to the community if we are not striving to survive every day? We can do things. We want to do things. But if we are too busy going through the red tape and bullshit of our community and our government, we cannot do things and provide for our community. We are crocheters, we are crafters, we can teach, we can help, we can do things. If we are not trying just to put food in our faces and provide roofing, what can you do? What about support the people at the bottom so that we can support the people at the top?
Jay, I totally hear you that we have not done enough for the lowest income levels. I mean, partly it's the way that we fund housing for that has to come through the government, just because it's really hard to build a, it's hard for a market rate developer to build units that are at that income level.
Then tell them to shove their money, because that's the problem. All of this is about profit and greed is going to starve everyone. How many people are actually in that 80% AMI? look at the percentage of Tacoma and tell me how much of Tacoma is at that 80% AMI and can continue to provide at the increase of rent rate and the cost of the taxes and the increase at everything else. Are you feeling secure in your housing right now, Ted?
Yes, I am lucky enough and privileged enough to have a decent roof over my head. But let me finish that if it does fall more on government and philanthropy to fund those lowest income housing units. And it's expensive and it's not something that we've done enough of. And so there are actions in here, as well as recognition that we've not done enough of that. But there are actions that could be targeted towards those lowest income levels. And so one of the hopes of the next couple of years is that some of these actions can better target financial support for our lowest income levels. And so we recognize the same thing that you're telling me right now. It's difficult to do, but we see the need out there. And so part of this is absolutely recognizing that we need to do a better job at that.
Jay, I want to thank you for bringing the passion and the reality to light today, and Ted for putting up with the fire, and appreciate that you came here. You kind of knew that this could be an audience where passions are going to run high. We have folks with lived experience, and we have folks who are working with those who have the least among us. So that's why this topic is so hot, and why if you've been able to see the chat, there's been a lot of commentary and ongoing focus on this issue that we do need to land more in that 30% AMI and below, and put resources there if we're going to raise this community up. So thank you, Jay. And Sarah, I see you have your hand up. Why don't we let you comment, and then we'll move on with the rest of our agenda today. And Sarah, we're not able to hear you right now.
Oh, it's my microphone. I've got a button on my microphone that I accidentally touched. Anyway, I just want to say, I'm glad somebody's showing some anger. The stuff that I see, I mean, I've been working with one person and they're finally able to get a home. And the only reason they're able to get some help is because their payee was murdered. And it's sad when it takes that long, when it takes that much just for that person to get help. And this person is diabetic. He's living in his car. People are robbing from him. And I'm glad to see somebody get angry, because I've been angry. I was angry when it happened when I got evicted, and I'm angry to see what's happening to other people. It's not fair. And I'm sorry for crying. I don't mean to get emotional, but she just hit a nerve, and she's right.
Thank you, Sarah. And again, thank you again, Ted, for being here. Hopefully you've heard some feedback that's helpful for policy going forward, and we trust you'll help raise up some of the issues that have been brought up here today.
No, absolutely.
That I will.
And I'll put my email in the chat. Like for Teresa, what you asked about having a more in-depth conversation, I'm totally open to that. I'm unsure how to structure that conversation, but maybe it just means having an open-ended conversation, and that's great. I'll put my email in, and then I'll see if I can put the slides in, and if not, I'll email them to you, Rob.
Okay, great.
Then I'll stay on for a little while just because I want to make sure I read everything in the chat, so in case there's anything else in there.
Perfect.
Thank you, everybody. I do appreciate your time.
And folks, if you do have things that you want to have Ted respond to, if you want to either direct message him your email address or drop your email in the chat so that you can grab it, that's probably be helpful as well. So let's shift. This is over to government updates. I don't believe we have anybody from the city of Tacoma reporting today. I know Caleb's on the call, but wasn't sure if he'd be able to speak. But he did provide an email to me regarding the an update on the Holy Rosary parking site. And does somebody from Alan, would you like to offer an update on the current status there?
Yes, I can offer an update, and I may have Nick Turner help me out too. He's our site manager. So we are getting cars in. I know I sent some information out with the coalition about how to access safe parking. We do encourage folks to call the number, the phone number that we have, and I can put that in the chat again. We don't want people just showing up at Holy Rosary at the site. We do have to keep good relations with the neighbors there. So we encourage people to call for the screening. We still do have some spaces available, I believe, but we are getting new folks in every day. Nick, are you still here, and do you have anything to add to that? Okay, Nick may.
Yeah, it looks like maybe he dropped off the call.
Okay. So again, I'll put our screening line in the chat again, and you can check the information I sent out to the coalition regarding screening. Yes, I agree, Richard. We do need safe parking for RVs as well. Hopefully we will get there before long.
Thank you, Alan, for the update and for the work that your team's doing with that new site. And let's see, do we have anybody from Pierce County Human Services that wants to offer an update? I didn't see Jeff on the call earlier, but maybe he's here now. Valerie, are you still here? Would you like to offer an update on housing assistance?
Sure. So rental assistance is coming to a close. We're down to our last provider, Helping Hand House. So we will be notifying anybody who's waiting for additional months of assistance and getting them closed out. And then eviction prevention is going great. We do have 2 providers. There is word that we might have additional funding coming from the state. So I know more money got put into the budget than originally was planned. So we are plan A, plan B, and plan C of what that looks like to make sure funds get out to the community as quick as possible while providing very intensive case management services. And we released a notice of a request for proposals today. So a prevention RFP has been released. It's $2 million over 2 years. It says anytime between September 2023 all the way through December of 2025 for those $2 million for prevention services. And that can be used for any definition of at-risk household. So super flexible RFP, shouldn't be that complicated. Hopefully we made it pretty simple for folks to apply, but really get creative and think about what a program would look like and what's needed in the community to really meet that need. So we have sent that out far and wide to many people as we can find, but if you have someone else who has not received it, please let me know and I'll make sure they get it. We are going to have a Q&A session. We're going to have a bidders conference, and then they are due. You got 4 weeks to do it. So we tried to give lots of extra time this time.
Great. Thanks, Valerie, and thanks for being here. And let's see, I see Isaiah on screen from Tacoma Pierce County Health Department. What do you have to share this week?
Hi all, so yeah, this is Isaiah from TPCHD. Quick couple updates. So from the E8 side of things, so environmental health side of things, our RFP is closed. It closed last week, so this is the funding for inclement weather that is for $25,000. And we received 3 applications, and so we're in the process of reviewing all those applications. They were all super great and super amazing. So it's quite kind of hard to decipher who's going to get that money, of course. So we're making sure that we're doing the best that we can to make sure that money is going to be appropriately supplied out. So I'm working with my boss, Adam, and we're working with our contracting department as well to figure out what would be the best process for moving forward. So as time moves on, I will make sure everyone's updated here because I'm sure everyone here is super anxious and excited to see what happens with that. So I will provide updates once we have more information on that. So that's super great. Jenny is not here today, so I'm going to cover her updates really quickly. So she has two major updates. Her first update is that our COVID homeless provider resource page is still operating, and it actually has been updated. So it's going to be following all DOH and CDC guidelines, and I'm going to post that in the chat here. So this is just generally COVID-19 resources for anyone who's doing human services. So not even people who are doing work with people who are unsheltered, but anyone who's doing any kind of social work. So that's been updated. It will be going down in the near future after we vet our future. Oh, my internet might be super good. I'm gonna turn off my camera really quick because my internet might be a little funky. Yes, so we're gonna be sunsetting that page soon here as we start opening up for more non-COVID related resources. So that'll be vetted and approved once our communications team moves forward with that process. And the other thing she wanted me to share today was that we have our flyer for free vaccines for adults. So I'm going to share that in the chat as well. And that also has been updated. So those are the three major updates from TPCHD. So, and I'll be here in the chat if anyone has any questions for me.
Thank you, Isaiah. And Ryan wins the funny award for that comment in the chat. Sarah, I see you have your hand up.
I have a question for the Tacoma and Pierce County Health Department.
Sure.
I forgot your name, sir. I'm sorry. I came here not feeling good, but anyways, I'm still here. But anyway, my question is, do you guys work with Adult Protective Services with your homeless people, with your homeless programs?
Over here at TPCHD, no, we do not.
Okay, just wondering.
Yep.
All right, thank you. Now I'm gonna have to mute because I gotta take care of this. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. And Isaiah, just so you know, there was another request in the chat. You probably didn't see it. Just if you could be a little more deliberate in your speaking so that folks who, especially those who have to rely on captions, so that those can be captured. Thanks. I know you speak quickly.
I know, I'm from the city, so like I'm really used to speaking really quick. It's been I used to do drama and speech and debate years ago, and everyone was always like, you gotta slow down, you gotta slow down. And I'm just like, I'll get the metronome, I promise.
All right, appreciate you making an effort there. And Cynthia?
Well, I just want to say thank you, Rob, and for Isaiah. You wouldn't want to run if you had a person who was in a wheelchair following you. You wouldn't want to do something that would affect people who are blind. Please consider those of us that have hearing loss. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. All right, so let's move on to the next items in our agenda. And obviously our agenda is a little bit blown up because we spent quite a bit of time talking about the displacement issue, which was critical. And I appreciate everybody's participation in that. Let's do the breakout review from last week's conversation, and then I'll do kind of an advocacy summary and go from there. So Timothy, you want to share the breakout?
Yeah, ready for that. I will be the essence of brevity. Last week was one of those discussions where the topic was general enough and the discussion was late enough in the call that hardly anything in terms of notes came back. So I just highlighted a couple of things that were coming up and put out the thing for form's sake. So there it is. That's my report. Don't miss the social gathering.
Great. Thank you, Timothy. And hopefully this week, our conversation, which we will get to very soon, gives us a little bit more fodder for sharing a summary. So let me bring up I was gonna, so as folks will remember, last Sunday wrapped up the current Washington State legislative session, at least wrapped it up for now. There's a lot of, so the 105-day session wrapped up Sunday evening, but they wrapped up without addressing how the state is going to provide guidance to local municipalities and counties around enforcement related to drug possession and the Blake decision. They dropped the ball at the last minute on that issue, which is one that we've talked about here a number of times, which has been talked about at the city of Tacoma. So there is the possibility of a special session being held specifically on that issue before the current temporary guidance related to the Blake decision ends in July. So I guess I would say stay tuned. There may be more to come from the state legislature. Meanwhile, a number of cities across the state are considering their own regulations regarding drug possession. And so in order to avoid the chaos, it's quite likely there will be some sort of special session coming. The word I will share, though, is that if that special session happens, it's likely to be just focused on this issue. So it's not anticipated that other housing, affordable housing and homelessness issues would be tackled during that special session. So if you subscribe to the Housing Alliance emails and you're one of our folks in the advocates list, you would have received an email earlier this week on Monday from, it would have come from my colleague, Michelle Thomas, who worked tirelessly in Olympia to try to push forward the Housing Alliance priorities. I'll just do a really quick overview of what was in that email for folks who maybe didn't receive it. And then I'll provide the link to the email on the web so everyone can read the context. The main thing that Michelle shared in this email is that it's directly because of the advocacy from the groups of folks who and I'm seeing some questions about the PowerPoint. Let me download it and make sure if I can open it. Oh, yep, I'm seeing the same issue. So I'll email Ted to try to get that. So in terms of, there was just a lot of thankfulness for the relentless advocacy that folks provided during the session. We recognize that things like rent stabilization did not ultimately move forward, and at the last minute, the push for a additional third option for real estate excise tax on the sale of higher priced real estate also did not move forward. So that ended up falling apart at the last minute, but we still did see some significant wins for affordable housing and homelessness funding. In the capital budget that was released last Friday, they did retain the $400 million for the Housing Trust Fund, which is the largest housing trust fund investment that's been made at the state level ever, without including federal dollars. So during the COVID time, we saw more money going into the Housing Trust Fund, but this is post-COVID, at least in terms of the legislative funding, and they still stepped up to get to 400 million. So that definitely needs acknowledged. That includes 40 million for land acquisition so that nonprofits can quickly acquire land for building low-income housing. It included 14.5 million for shelter and housing for homeless youth and young adults. And it also included 6 million in preservation and investments in manufactured housing communities, so that there's not as much displacement from those communities. And then 60 million for infrastructure that's needed when building new affordable homes. So the capital budget had a lot of good news for the issues that we're concerned about. The operating budget included an 8% increase in the aged, blind, and disabled cash assistance program starting in 2024. Permanent ongoing increase of 26.5 million for the housing and essential needs rental assistance program. And then an ongoing human services increase or homeless services increase of 6.5% that will be used to help raise the pay rates for those who are working with homeless populations across the state. So that's a positive that continues and continues funding for what was previously a pilot project. There was also over more than $50 million investment to help fund House Bill 1260, which ends the repayment requirement for extremely low income folks who receive the age, blind, and disabled cash assistance program. People used to have to pay that back. The state used to, once people got their SSI, yeah, Todd, I did say that, although we'll see how all that works out. It's all in the details. So my fingers are crossed for you. Yeah, 50 million for funding House Bill 1260, 5 million for eviction prevention and increased funding for tenants' right to counsel. So that should help folks who I believe who, like Lori, works with at Tacoma Pro Bono. And then great news when it comes to the issue of equity and some form of not really reparation, but making things a little more right in the world. $150 million investment for House Bill 1474, which is the Covenant Investment Act. And that is to help provide homeownership opportunities for people harmed by the ongoing racist real estate practices like restrictive covenants and the legacy of redlining that still exists today. There was funding included to backfill the loss of funding for homeless services through the document recording fees. It's not yet clear if that funding will be sufficient to backfill that for the full 2 years. So there's a possibility we'll end up going back to the state in the next session to try to advocate for more dollars to backfill homeless services across the state. And then this wasn't in the email from Michelle, but I also wanted to point out that the state's right-of-way program received funding actually at a little bit higher level than folks expected. That will mean that people who are living along state rights of way, I-5, and other areas, at least across the 5 states that currently have the right-of-way funding, or 5 states, the 5 counties that have the right-of-way funding, will continue into the new year. So that's a program that is actually kind of a best practice. At least in some counties, it's been highly successful in moving people, not just removing people from rights of way, but moving them into better places to live, either shelter or preferably housing. So there's a lot of good news there. The Housing Alliance also saw a significant surge in the number of advocates who have signed up to be part of the movement for housing justice. And very soon I will be sending out an email to folks who are on the list from my boss, Rachel Myers, regarding a celebration that we will host on May 31st to kind of talk through some of these wins that took place during the legislative session and have an opportunity for both advocates who testified during the session and the lawmakers who took tough positions to share their perspective on what was accomplished and what lies ahead. So appreciate everybody who stepped up. And the last thing I think I'll say about this is that we continue to have a need to convince our lawmakers about the importance of creating more affordable housing and better tenant rights across the state. And it's critical for those of us in Pierce County to make sure that we make our lawmakers aware of the issues. typically it's easy to think because, especially in Tacoma, we feel like we have progressive lawmakers in place to help move these issues. The answer to that is yes, we do have progressive lawmakers, but they still don't necessarily understand the value of moving forward with more tenant rights and more affordable housing. And especially with having Speaker Jenkins in the Tacoma in the 27th legislative district, we need to continue to work with her and let her know how important these issues are. And for some odd reason, Pierce County advocates, we don't have as many as some other districts do. So that's something we need to work on. And I'm sure my colleague Poe will be here in future weeks to talk about how he'd like to bring more of us in to be advocates going forward. So that's that. Very quickly on the city of Tacoma side, the topics that are going to take place at Tuesday's study session do not relate to homelessness. And there's nothing related to homelessness and affordable housing on the city council agenda for Tuesday night. However, I'll just plant the seed again that every other week there's an opportunity to get in front of the city council during community forum and talk about the issues that matter so much to this coalition and the impact of sweeps and the insanity of continuing to do what we know does not work. So that opportunity won't exist this week, but it will the following week. All right, so let's move on. What we wanted to do was a quick do a breakout session related to what I just shared. So hopefully you didn't fall asleep. We want to talk about what do these outcomes from the legislative session likely mean for your work, for the people who you serve, and for the issues you're concerned about. And before we get to the breakout, Sarah, I see your hand up. Is that from before, or did you have another question?
I had one more question about when you're talking about the advocacy emails. I just want to make sure that I'm getting those advocacy emails, and I want to explain why. I've been on the crisis committee for several years, and I just found out about 3 months ago that the Washington Council of the Blind Advocacy Committee is going to start working on investing taking action for those who are homeless and blind, because this is becoming an issue. And yeah, sure, mine was the first one that they knew about, but there's so many more. And that's a lot of, when the chair calls me, it's usually somebody who's homeless in Tacoma, who's blind. And that's why I want to make sure I'm on the advocacy list, because I want to keep up to date. I want to be able to report back to the advocacy committee for the Washington Council of the Blind and keep them up to date on what's going on.
Thank you, Sarah. And let me, so I will drop the link to the advocacy email that would have come out on, that's not it, that would have come out on Monday that I was largely reading from. And I can double check for you, Sarah, if you are on the list for receiving these updates from the Housing Alliance. So thanks for raising that up. All right, so let's spend a few minutes in breakouts. And again, as a reminder, the breakouts are really about networking, but we always have a topic as well. So did you hear anything that concerned you related to what happened during the legislative session this year? Are there issues you're concerned about that you think you need to as an individual, or we need to as a community advocate for moving forward? And so let me set up the breakout rooms. We'll spend the next 15 minutes in breakouts, which will bring
You'll have to invite me into one, remember?
Yeah, I'll do that for you.
Thanks.
All right. So here we go. We'll come back here at 10:50. And thank you, everyone. Hopefully that was a good breakout conversation. I see some of you are starting to paste your notes into the chat. Please do that if you were taking notes in your breakout room. And we only have 9 minutes left in our appointed time for today's meeting. So we're going to race through the remaining items on the agenda. But please do take the time to put your notes into the chat. That's really helpful. Let's see, quick update for Safe Sites for All. Jan, anything you need to share?
Please join us Monday at noon. Go to our website to register to jump on the call. We have good representation by the Safe Parking Network, the new parking network with the Holy Rosary, Inclement Weather, the City of Tacoma, and others. So come on in.
Thank you, Jan. And how about coalition committee updates?
So I have a couple of things. This is Rosemary from the governance group. We met and took the feedback of the group into consideration to say, at this time, there are no plans to change anything about our format. We'll stay on Zoom for Friday meetings. There is interest in meeting in person in perhaps a quarterly form, and we suggested a couple reasons for doing that. You could even include today's desire for a discussion of displacement strategies as perhaps an in-person opportunity that could be considered. But in addition, to think about perhaps a training session for advocacy, and based on some of the things Rob said about Pierce County needing more advocate training, and also opportunities to meet together to plan actions that we might want to do that are more of the grassroots activist movement sort than often we do in this group. So that's of interest, and we'll continue. We're meeting Mondays at 11 at this time, and if you're ever free to join us at 11, it'll be on the coalition page. The other announcement is that we have received the information about the screening access for the Reckoning in Boston, and we'll be sending that out to the coalition really quite soon. So that's for screening the video, the Reckoning in Boston on the 13th, 14th, and 15th. You might consider having a group of folks over to watch it together and having your own discussion. And then on the 18th, we'll be meeting at Shiloh Baptist Church for a community conversation. That's what I have so far.
Thank you, Rosemary. And let's see, now we have some time for good trouble announcements. And Sarah, I see you have your hand up.
What's good trouble? What does that mean?
It's just kind of good of the order, things that were community happenings, things like that.
Well, I wanted to ask if the last person who spoke, the governance person, could email. Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted.
Good. It can't, my computer just talked. I don't know why it's doing. Anyway, I'm wondering if somebody could email me that the information, the email, or the address for the Baptist Church meeting on the 18th. And then also the person I've been working with for about 10 months, Adult Protective Services got involved because he lost his payee, and they've got him in, they're trying to set him up, sign him up. Oh, I gotta. There, I think I stopped it. Sorry about that. They're gonna try to get him in rapid housing, and I'm really happy because he's been stuck on the street, for over at least 10 months. And there's been hospitalizations. He needs surgery, and he needs training, and he can't get that training if he's on the street. So this is a real good thing.
Yeah. All right, Sarah, thank you for sharing that. And Todd, I see you have your hand up.
Three things real quickly. A couple months ago, I worked with Pierce County WorkSource, and they decided to create a homeless flyer promoting other jobs than just the conventional standard 8 to 5 of the rest of us. So WorkSource had a flyer that talks about micro businesses and things that folks can do differently. So that said, The Recovery Cafe is now starting a micro business a workshop for those that are homeless that would like some assistance and knowledge in that area. So that's starting in May. And the last item is here personally for me locally as a city councilor of Ording. Pierce County a couple weeks ago passed their 0.1% homeless sales tax for everybody. But Ording, in a stroke of genius, passed it before Pierce County passed it, which means that all of the 0.1% our citizens pay will stay in Ording for our affordable housing needs and not go to Pierce County. So last week, the Ording City Council passed an ad hoc committee to determine how our monies will now be spent, and I am on that committee. So you can guarantee that there will be some lively conversations and some good inputs as somebody with lived experience. So anyways, thank you, everybody.
Great, thanks, Todd. Anyone else who has an item for the good of the order they'd like to share, or a success story that they would like to share? All right, so I don't want to drag out today's meeting. We've got 3 minutes left. I can release you to the world 3 minutes early. But if you have an interest in the capacity to stay on the line, we will spend a few minutes planning for next week's meeting. If you can't do that, I hope everybody has a great weekend. Enjoy the sunshine while we've got it, and we'll see everybody again next Friday.